Uh, our next paper will be The Price of Freedom, the relationship between the prosperity of Iraqi refugees and the West. Its author, Noor Jiwad, is an information systems major and creative writing creative writing minor, hailing from Northern Virginia. She is passionate about all topics related to the humanities, which she had the opportunity to explore during her freshman year. So,
Thank you so much. Give me 1 second. All right. Good evening. My name is Noor Jiwad. Thank you all for coming. My essay is titled The Price of Freedom, and let's just dive right in. In 2003, following a decade of embargoes placed by the United Nations, President George W. Bush led an invasion on an already destabilized Iraq based on the fears of weapons of mass destruction. The results were apocalyptic, with direct death counts ranging from 100,000 to upwards of 1 million. The fear of these weapons were completely unfounded. The leader of a CIA mission responsible for finding and destroying them returned to Congress to testify that none of them existed. This did not change the outcome of the war, forcing thousands of remaining surviving Iraqi families to decide between living in Iraq as an internally displaced person or settling in another country. Many chose the West, losing hope in the future of Iraq. It's been over 20 years since the Iraq War. The central question of my paper was how the Iraqi refugee has fared in the West after all this time. For my research, I created a framework for measuring the prosperity of a population based on existing scholarship. That is, by examining mental health, physical health, and economic health. Each aspect is impacted by external factors and can influence one another. Not only does this paper aim to measure the Iraqi refugees' health, but to propose methods of raising this prosperity level. The first prosperity pillar is mental health. Becoming a refugee is an extremely traumatizing experience and requires many resources to cope with. I equate this to a shadow, one that follows refugees around in the forms of grief or homesickness. Many Iraqi refugees had not given up on the idea of their homes, and even now, decades later, still experience the loss that was a prosperous cultural center. This shadow also follows around refugees in more tangible ways, such as post-traumatic stress disorder, with a third of all Iraqi refugees at risk and 50% of Iraqi refugees screening positive for mental health concerns. The trauma embedded in Iraqi refugees mainly goes undiagnosed and unspoken. So my research has led me to a point of very poor mental health for Iraqi refugees, and I explore therapy as a solution in my paper. Due to the family-oriented nature of Middle Eastern society, therapy as it manifests in Western society is taboo. But even when considering alternatives like tackling the collective trauma and grief of families as a whole unit instead, the shadow does not fade away. The trauma endured is still there. It doesn't change how many Iraqi refugees lost their sense of community and couldn't resettle into the Western societies. Furthermore, it doesn't change the physical ramifications of trauma. The second prosperity pillar is physical health. Rather than stigmatism, the primary barriers are language differences and complicated healthcare systems. Research was conducted in Canada in 2024 for the COVID-19 pandemic that supported findings from a decade before, back in Texas in 2015, showing that 84.3% of participants worried about being able to access healthcare, whether it be due to not understanding governmental services or the language barrier itself. Not being able to access healthcare has worsened the symptoms that over half the population faces, which does nothing to improve mental health as well. So my research has led me to also a point of very poor physical health for Iraqi refugees. However, the difference is that physical health can be treated much more easily than mental health. If you can get a diagnosis and treatment exists, there's no reason to not seek help, which is what leads into the largest, most problematic barrier and the final prosperity pillar, financial health. To begin this next segment, I'll lead by stating that my research has led me to prescribe a very poor financial health for Iraqi refugees settled in the West. Even in my essay, I structure the reveal this way, because this is not a new concept. Researchers have reported the financial woes of Iraqi refugees for years. Lives have been put on hold and completely upended because of no access to financial resources. This is worsened when considering how most of these refugees live in a self-identified middle class in Iraq. They were suddenly thrown into poverty, which in America specifically is unique in its systemic nature. While I'll get back to this in a moment, I admittedly don't get to explore this multifaceted topic much in my essay and could only analyze a limited scope. As I mentioned in laying out the framework, the pillars of prosperity can affect one another, like physical health worsening mental health. The poor financial health, though, is what negatively impacts the entire population the most. Nothing is free, whether it's healthcare, training, or simply people's spirits, which can be crushed living under the jurisdiction of the United States. There are no resources put into place for economic mobility. If the Iraqi refugee is trapped in low-income situations, they cannot invest in ways to heal their mental and physical health. They may not even be able to afford food and housing. They are still suffering at the hands of American imperialism, and their shadow extends. So, now what? I've attempted to consider solutions to all the main roots of the problem, like cultural values or language barriers, and in my essay, I briefly consider the US rebuilding Iraq. But in the larger context of the Arab Spring, where the United States allowed many countries to fall further into destabilization and chaos, that's just a fantasy. I instead fall back on existing scholarship, specifically on Eugene Richard's theory of poverty. As I mentioned, I didn't get to explore this theory much, but he argues that the problem exists due to American exploitation rather than natural causes, and that anti-poverty systems do work. It's a complicated issue, and there's no way to fix American poverty as a whole in the lifespan of the Iraqi refugee. However, uh, I'm sorry, I'm going backwards. However, his analysis of the anti-poverty system's effectiveness can be applied to the Iraqi refugee. The net fiscal impact of all refugees and asylees hosted by the United States in the last 15 years is $123.8 billion, proving that financial help does work. While it's true that giving a check to a family will not be an end-all solution to getting rid of the shadow of trauma, both physical and mental, it does allow for economic mobility. Iraqi refugees can invest in their personal capital in order to attempt to return to that middle class. It's not going to fix everything, and maybe it won't fix anything, but steps must be taken to amend that hurt. Because there is no situation where the United States isn't responsible for Iraq and therefore Iraqi refugees. Earlier, I mentioned the dates of two studies that took place, 2015 and 2024, that is 8 and 17 years respectively after the start of the Iraq War. 2 decades later, and research is still being conducted about the ongoing ramifications of destruction. Destruction caused by the United States government. From the tariffs to the lies about weapons of mass destruction, there are thousands of ruined lives as proof of this destruction. When we discuss reparations, it's not for the descendants of a generation that were tortured. It's for the Iraqi refugees who are currently living in the West. It's for the Iraqi refugees who deserve justice. One of the core values of the United States is the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and Iraqi refugees cannot be denied that any longer. We, as university students, have a collective responsibility to seek and demand justice. 20 years ago, the Bush administration decided that they needed to liberate Iraq. This is the price of freedom. The only requirement of my position paper was that our topic had to be related to refugees. As the child of 2 Iraqi immigrants, I knew what I wanted to talk about immediately, because I've seen how Iraqi refugees have suffered and have experienced some of that poor prosperity myself. But I didn't understand the full scope of the harm. After combing through research and papers and books and Congress transcripts, conducting my interview, and sitting with charts of data, I was shocked by how the entire world turned a blind eye. I couldn't help but make my position a demand for justice. I found some sources as displayed on the screen that left me crying and some that left me furious, but no one had ever connected the causes and effects of the war with the future. Despite how dismal my findings were, I am not crestfallen, and I want to use my research skills to advocate for the importance of delivering the Iraqi people justice and shedding light on their shadow. As the poet Dunya Mikhail writes, "Stop your questioning America and offer your hand to the tired on the other shore." Thank you.
Thank you, Noor. Our third presentation is entitled An Island in Crisis: How Self-Sabotage Has Led to Stagnation. Its author is Adriana Claudio, a freshman double majoring in international affairs and international business with a concentration in international economics. She is a Puerto Rican and Cuban American who enjoys researching and writing about the consequences of United States influence in Latin America.
Hi everyone. Last semester I took the UW 1020 class Law as a Force for Social Change, and the title of my final essay was An Island in Crisis: How Self-Sabotage Has Led to Stagnation. This paper delves into current issues facing Puerto Rico and the cause I believe is perpetuating these issues. So my why. Simply put, this topic is very personal to me. I'm half Puerto Rican and most of my family lives in Puerto Rico. These problems have affected them most of their lives and continues to affect them. But as I grew older, what I never understood was why nothing was changing on the island. It seemed to me, and I later confirmed this in the early stages of my research, that a majority of people had a unified understanding of the issues facing the island. The issue wasn't that there was such a divide in what the Puerto Rican electorate considered major problems on the island, but yet the same leaders were being elected and the same problems were reoccurring. So knowing that Puerto Rico was close to a general election, which took place last November for them, I decided last semester to focus my final paper on these questions and try to understand what was really going on in Puerto Rico. So on to my paper development. I have all this here to show you that throughout my process, I ended up simplifying a lot of my research question and what ended up being my final thesis. This, in communication with my professor, we've kind of simplified to two reasons why I needed to simplify. And the first one was that I had a lot of research. So by this point, I knew a lot about the island. I knew a lot about the problems, and it's it's really layered, multifaceted. So I really needed to work on simplifying what exactly I wanted to hone in on with this paper and delve into that completely. And the second one is that I had to change my audience. So the argument that I'm going to make in this paper is based on scholar research that has already been done and claims that have already been made. I'm kind of responding to that. So my audience would need to have a basic understanding of the Puerto Rican political system to kind of understand where my point was coming across. And so I had to change my audience to someone that, understood that at a higher level. So then I didn't have to go and explain things like the political system and what the party stood for separately in my paper. So those two things changed, and it allowed me to come to my final thesis, which is that progress in Puerto Rico has been ineffective because there's a problematic mix between status change and localized issues within the political parties that has led Puerto Rico's political system into crisis. So key discoveries. So in general, I can sum up my paper by me saying that Puerto Rico's political system is flawed. Down below, I kind of have some keynotes of what you need to understand in order to get what I'm further going to say. So there are many parties in Puerto Rico, but the two that I focus on are the ones that have won the governor position since the beginning of Puerto Rico's electoral system, which is the PNP, which is pro-statehood with the United States, and the PPD, which is an enhanced Commonwealth status. Something to note here is that these are both local parties running for local positions, yet their parties are based on the relationship they want to have with the United States. And so what I ended up finding is that this problematic mix between status and local issues is manifesting itself in two key areas of Puerto Rico's politics. There's many, but these were the two big ones that I found. So the first one was economic policy reliant on the United States. What I found was that Puerto Rican politicians from the PPD and the PNP have implemented disastrous economic policy for the sake of promoting their stance of a stronger relationship with the United States. Puerto Rico is already economically tied to the US. This is just what happens with being a territory of the United States. But there were historically areas of the economy that could have remained independent from the United States. However, because these parties wanted a closer relationship with the United States, they created tax incentive policies that ultimately ended up causing Puerto Rico to go bankrupt in 2015 with $72 billion of debt. They ended up destroying the local economy because of their stance on status. But furthermore, an issue with that is that the people who are now demanding change in Puerto Rico's two-party system, the who are now demanding change, the two-party system cannot and will not accommodate this so long as the local positions are too tied on the status of issue. The political climate does not have a space for the Puerto Rican electorate to treat these issues as separate. There is now a political system that does not represent the will of its people properly. And so the second kind of area that I found was the corruption in Puerto Rico's voting system. So in my paper, I delve into different aspects of this, like tampering, general corruption, and the boycotting of elections and plebiscites in Puerto Rico's voting system. But a key point that I wanted to bring home had to do with the plebiscites. And it was that the Puerto Rican political parties should not have the power to make and supply plebiscites because all this has done is corrupt the practice of plebiscites and has weakened the credibility of plebiscites towards actual progress. A vital step towards handling these problems is taking status voting off the hands of Puerto Rican politicians. Essentially, these are local parties dealing with local issues. The only real entity that can change the status of Puerto Rico is Congress. Whether they will do that is a separate conversation, but Puerto Rican politics and the political parties that handle local issues should not be able to write, create, and distribute these plebiscites, especially if they are really biased on the types of status they want for Puerto Rico. And then a third point that I had noted, this was kind of where I concluded my paper, was about the La Alianza coalition. So as I was writing this paper, I was keeping track of the election, and something that I found through both research and talking with native Puerto Ricans like my family and other people here on campus was that there was this coalition that was gaining traction, and it ended up making this election historical. So La Alianza is a coalition that was created by smaller parties to oppose the PPD and the PNP by promising to prioritize good governance over the issues of Puerto Rico's status. So Juan Dalmau, who was the candidate of the coalition, ended up becoming the first candidate from outside the two main parties on the island to finish second in Puerto Rico's general elections. This is monumental. It's never been done before, but something that I found in realizing is that it actually proved my point on why these issues need to be separated. When people have the proper outlet to vote for the issues they care about effectively, it changes their voting behavior. This coalition reveals that many Puerto Ricans are disillusioned by the two existing parties in the game for status and local issues, which has created a dysfunctional political landscape in Puerto Rico for so long. So this is a quote that I took from the conclusion of my essay, and it kind of sums up what I think is going on in Puerto Rico, and it ultimately ended up being the title of my paper. And I said it's self-sabotage at the highest level, and the Puerto Rican people do not deserve it. There needs to be recognition, of course, for what the United States has done to hurt the Puerto Rican people and leave them stratified to congressional attention that they do not want to give. However, the Puerto Rican government does need to turn inward and look at itself and realize that a lot of the problems that have been perpetuated and worsened throughout the years has been through the political system that is mixing two issues that have nothing to do with each other, and as a result is creating a political system entirely that is dysfunctional. So the overall UW 1020 takeaways that I took from this paper and from my class, Law as a Force for Social Change, is first developing ideas. So a big thing for me was that the first draft that I had did not look anything like what I ended up turning in. This is just the point of when you kind of get to the collegiate level of academic writing, it's a big process, and sometimes you're going to have to go back to the drawing board. That's something that I noticed, and if you take this class, you'll notice that as well. Another thing that was stressed in this class that really helped improve my writing was developing a unique take. So using academic writing as a contribution rather than restating existing ideas. This class really pushed me to think further as to what was missing in a lot of these academic pieces. And ultimately, my paper ended up being surrounding that new idea that I'm very proud of and I worked very hard for. And the final one is understanding scholarly sources. This class in particular, we delve into a lot of legal writing and advanced writing to prepare ourselves for the process of this final essay. If you take this class, that's a really great takeaway. I now know how to dissect this writing. And it'll be really great in general getting into your UW 1020 classes. And that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Adriana. So I realized I think I failed to introduce myself at the outset. I'm Thomas Choate. I'm a teaching assistant professor in the Department of Strategic Management and Public Policy in the School of Business. And I'm very happy to be here this evening to hear these excellent presentations from our panelists, and now to moderate the question and answer and discussion between our audience and our panelists. So if you would like to be recognized, we have almost 20 minutes here for that discussion. If you would like to be recognized, please feel free to raise your virtual hand on Zoom or signal in some other way, and we'll happily give the floor over to you so you can ask your interesting questions, whether that's about the research and writing process or the substance of these presentations and projects. Thank you. Kaylee.
Hi. I was wondering, whoever wanted to answer this, I was wondering, how you chose your, like, topics. Like, what made you specifically choose these things?
I'll go first. Um, what made me choose this topic is just because it's so personal to me. It was kind of something that I always was learning about growing up. So it was just when I was able to decide my topic, this was just kind of the first thing I thought of, and it was the one that I think left me the most intrigued. Like it was really genuinely a passion for me, and so then that's the reason why I chose it.
In the same vein as Adriana, this topic was also very personal to me, and it's something that in the past I knew a little bit about, but I didn't really have a lot of in-depth knowledge about, and I saw this class as an opportunity to research more, educate myself, and yeah.
For me, it wasn't that I actually related to topic. It was more of the book we read, Exit West. I think a lot of people are under the assumption that migrants who migrate to a new country stay together, but in the book we saw that they split up, and I think that was just interesting to me. So I just did more research and based my paper on that.
Jacob, please.
Yeah. So first, three outstanding presentations. I enjoyed all of them. My question is for Noor. I am wondering, I was intrigued when I heard that you're a creative writing minor. I'm wondering if your creative writing background or your creative abilities influenced your writing in this project at all, or your research.
Oh, most definitely. My initial draft for this, I remember the feedback I got was that it sounded too much like a story. And that's something that definitely shows in my writing style. It's very narrative. A lot of what I was saying in my presentation was actually direct quotes from my essay, what I was saying about the price of freedom. So definitely my creative writing background, it helps me make things, I don't want to say sound more dramatic, but it kind of does. It adds an extra layer, I think, of humanity to my writing. So it most definitely showed in my paper.
I know many of our audience members, you know, are enrolled in UW 1020 or otherwise, considering writing projects that you may work on. So you might consider, what did you see in these presentations that you think might connect to your own interest, and what questions might you ask about that? And while you're doing that, I can perhaps ask a question as well. I think I led by saying how cohesive this panel seemed, and I wondered if our panelists might have a little bit of a discussion together about how they might compare and contrast the experiences of the groups they studied that face, differing social challenges, but have some similarities and some differences. Iraqi refugees, Afghan migrants, and, the residents of Puerto Rico.
I mean, I can start. I mean, I know that I focus a lot of my writing on the residents that currently live in Puerto Rico, but we also know that it's a fact that a lot of Puerto Ricans have left the island for the United States because of these exact problems, that they just find that they cannot um, live a good life on the island anymore. And so, I mean, I think what I found really interesting with all three of our presentations that we explore that struggle and we explore where there needs to be certain level of improvement and solutions made. And I mean, this is a great forum to do that, and through writing and through utilizing our voices in this way to bring attention to these problems.
Yeah, in all three of our presentations, there is this common theme of trying to better one's life. In all three of our presentations, we focus a lot on just how can these migrants, how can these citizens, how are they trying to make their lives better? What unique struggles are they facing? And there's like this common theme of imperialism, subjecting them to lives they don't want. And there's a certain degree of helplessness when talking about these subjects, because it kind of feels like what Adriana said in her paper, like self-sabotage. It's it feels like there's just a certain level of helplessness, which is why it's important that we discuss these things in depth so we can really find the root, so we stop feeling so helpless and we can do something about it.
I agree, but I also think it's interesting how we all kind of made the idea that like once they come here, like for whatever reason, they don't really have a plan, and sometimes the resources they have here that the US provides, it's not the best for them, like mental health wise or like financial, etc.
Again, I know these were three very detailed and thorough presentations, so forming questions might take a little bit of time. Please feel free to take that time and to, again, raise your virtual hand if you have a question. And even if it's not maybe a fully formed question, I'm sure our panelists are very well prepared to, to take it to somewhere that will be useful for you. Eli, please.
Hey, I had one question. I know these were conducted last semester, and I think one question I had was about how today's like current political climate, such as like the results of the 2024 election or recent events with the Taliban? How did that inform or change your research, if at all? If that makes sense.
I can start with this. I think with specifically related to the Iraqi people, I think the 2024 election hasn't really changed that much. Current US policy when it relates to Iraq isn't that great because it's kind of non-existent. There was a interim government that was set up and it did not go well. And for the last like decade, the US has kind of just pulled out of Iraq and just like they wipe their hands clean of it and they're just not really involved. And I don't foresee the Trump presidency changing that. I don't think there's any real interest in going back to the country or doing any trying to help out, sadly. So
Yeah, I can touch up on that. I mean, the Puerto Rican election and the United States general elections were happening around the same time. So I mean, some of the biggest impacts were really from Puerto Rico, but in terms of the United States election, I think we know the sentiments of this administration in regards to Puerto Rico. It's not very highly favorable. So the conversation of whether status is going to be discussed, if any sort of cooperation between the Congress and Puerto Rico's government is going to occur to help some of the problems that are happening on the island, that's probably it was already very small chance even in previous years, but even now I think it's going to be lower. Lights just turned off. But yeah, in general, it's looking that way, but I think some of the biggest impact in terms of elections have been more towards the island's local elections.
I'm not gonna lie, I don't have much to say on this topic, but I think it kind of relates to both of them, like it's the same thing almost, but for Afghan migrants, it's a little bit different because these Afghan migrants started migrating to the US back in Trump's administration. I actually found that while I was researching for this paper. So and now that Trump's back in office, I guess we'll just have to see how much it affects them. But that was a good question. I just don't know how to answer it.
I can ask another question as well that may be a little more general or process based. I know that all of you in your presentations talked about your research and writing process. Wonder if, kind of on a more specific point, whether you might share what you found to be the most challenging part of that research or writing process that you would advise others maybe to spend the most time and most effort on.
I mean, I can kind of highlight this in the presentation, but out of all three of the ones that I highlighted, I would say for my class, developing a unique take, I think that's very time consuming. Um, I mean, professor will know this very well, but you know, it's you're looking at scholars who have done this for a very long time and you're challenging their take and in this case in the span of a semester. It's very possible and but it's very challenging. And so it takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of understanding, reading a lot, reading a lot of sources, and then kind of developing where is there a fault line, and then also then double checking to see if what you're doubting and what you maybe the avenue you may go towards your idea has not already been been thought of. And it doesn't have to always be a unique take. It doesn't have to be like you're solving world hunger or anything, but it's what are you challenging that is not just restating the norm. And for my class and for me that was challenging, but it was very rewarding in the end when I developed my paper.
For me, it was definitely relevancy. I highlighted in my during my presentation that like one of the studies was from 2015, and the majority of studies were either directly after the Iraq War or around like in the mid 2010s. There was a kind of shockingly shortage of research in the 2020s, and I knew this was an ongoing issue, but I was struggling to find any scholarship to back me up. So, and it also that really made it harder for me to come up with my solution, which I admit it's not a perfect solution, which is it's was both because of the limited scope of this assignment. I'm like Adriana said, I'm not solving world hunger here, but and also it was just there's such a lack of research on this and research in recent times that I was struggling to come up with like all the if no one else found a solution, how was I going to find one? I did manage to find a book that was published in like 2023, which was kind of it was like a Hail Mary for me. It was it was beautiful, and that really led my solution in the end. But that's definitely if you're struggling to come up with like relevancy, try to find it as quickly as possible.
I think for me, it was the beginning, like just choosing a topic, because writing is not my favorite. I'm a STEM major for a reason, but as long as you have a topic that you're interested in, it's not gonna seem like a chore to you. Like it won't seem like a waste of time. And also when you're doing this, I know you guys like did solutions, and mine kind of touched on a solution, but it doesn't, you don't have to be talking about a problem that you need to solve. You could just, your paper could just be about bringing awareness to a topic, or it could be arguing an idea. So like don't overthink it. And but yeah.
Thank you. We still have time for further questions. Okay. Do our panelists have any final thoughts for our audience or questions for our audience?
Just don't overthink this project. It seems like a lot when you're first starting. It seems like you have so much research. It seems like you have to write 30 pages and you're gonna be staying up all night in Gelman working on it. Don't think of it in such big terms. Break down the project. Pick something you're interested in and just set tasks that you can manage, say like by tonight, I want to have read this paper. I want to have pick the key points from it. Don't stress yourself out. This is a fun project if you let it be a fun project. And this was a lot of fun doing this presentation as well.
Yes, I agree with Noor. Just find topic that you love and also just kind of think of this as an opportunity. I mean, we're at the collegiate level. If you really enjoy what you're writing and you want to continue further research, I mean, this is a great starting point to even begin that process if that's something that you like or are interested in. But just think of it as an opportunity. Like there's just so many different types of UW 1020s. It covers such a broad range, so find something that you really enjoy and kind of go all in with it. And if you do that, you're again like it might be a little challenging. I mean, that's the point. It's supposed to challenge you, but in the end, it's going to be really rewarding. Like I really did love this class and what it taught me by the end of it.
Also, one piece of advice I'd give when you're researching for scholarly articles and you click on something and you don't have full access to it, use your GW login, like log in through your institution so you don't have to pay for an article that you'll probably never look at again. But you put that GW login to good use.
Well, as we reach our closing here, I want to again thank our audience, thank the organizers of the conference, thank the professors of these students, and ask all of you to join me in thanking our panelists tonight.